Most people think union busting begins when employees try to unionize. By then, the company has already been working on you for years. Before anyone says the word union, the company has already taught you who not to trust. It taught you which coworker talks too much, which manager listens too closely, which conversation belongs in the parking lot and not the break room. You learned all of this without a class, without a memo, without anyone sitting you down and explaining the rules. You absorbed it the way you absorb everything at work, by watching what happened to the people who did not. By the time workers start organizing, the workplace has already been trained to fear itself. That training did not happen by accident. It happened through systems most people never think to name, because naming them requires trusting someone enough to talk about them, which is the first thing the systems remove. One clarification before we go further. In the U.S., workers have the legal right to organize, to discuss pay and working conditions with coworkers, and to act collectively to improve those conditions. This is educational commentary, not legal advice. Labor rights depend on the facts, the location, and the specific workplace. What follows is not about whether the rights exist. It is about how they get made unreachable before anyone tries to use them. The first mechanism does not feel like strategy. It feels like your manager believing in you. Own your growth. Advocate for yourself. Have that direct conversation. You heard it in onboarding. You have heard it in every review since. And in a limited sense, it is not wrong. But watch what happens when that becomes the entire framework for an entire workforce. You and 40 other people are underpaid. The response the workplace offers is not a structure that would surface that as a collective fact. It is an individual suggestion, delivered privately to each of you separately. Talk to your manager. Some of you do. A few get adjustments. Most are told to keep demonstrating their value and revisit it at the next review cycle. Nobody in that building ever has to say out loud that 40 people share a problem, because the vocabulary the workplace gave you does not include that sentence. Union busting begins when a collective problem is disguised as an individual weakness. That is how the trap stays clean. No conspiracy required. Just a consistent frame applied across onboarding decks and performance reviews and manager trainings that routes every shared condition back to individual responsibility until the idea of a shared problem starts to feel like a failure of self-awareness. Now think about the person sitting beside you. You probably do not know what they make. You might have a rough sense, but not a number, not a confident one. You do not know if your manager rates you above them or below them. You do not know whether the public praise your manager gave you last week was also given to them, or whether you are ahead of them on some invisible promotion timeline that neither of you has ever been shown. You do not know any of this because knowing it would require a conversation that the culture of your workplace has made feel inappropriate. That did not happen naturally. Performance rankings that sort people into tiers. Bonus pools designed to be finite so that one person's strong quarter comes at the cost of someone else's. Promotions announced with no transparent criteria. Pay kept confidential not by law in most states, but by a social pressure strong enough that bringing it up feels like picking a fight. Each of these systems has a business explanation. Together, they produce one specific result. Your coworker is not naturally your enemy. The company built a scoreboard and put both of you on it. The easiest workforce to control is not a weak workforce. It is a workforce where nobody trusts the person sitting beside them. The person beside you stops looking like backup and starts looking like a threat. Not because anything happened between you, because the structure makes that the rational read. The third mechanism depends on that atmosphere already existing. Two employees compare pay near the vending machine. Nothing dramatic, just two people discovering a number. By the following Friday, one of them is being pulled aside. Their tone has been noticed. Someone felt uncomfortable. Nothing formal, nothing on paper, just a manager's quiet expression of concern and a conversation that ends with the employee feeling like they did something wrong. No rule was cited, no policy was violated, but a lesson was delivered to everyone who heard about it. Talking about pay becomes starting drama. Mentioning that the scheduling is unfair becomes being negative. Raising a concern about management behavior in front of more than one person becomes not being a team player. The label changes by workplace, the function never does. Before they stop the union, they stop the conversation that could create one. Nobody has to ban the conversation. Nobody has to post a rule. If enough people have watched what happened to the last person who said something too clearly, the workforce manages the information blackout on its own. Management does not even have to be in the room. The fourth mechanism gets presented as the solution, the open door policy. Your manager says their door is always open. A senior leader says they want direct feedback, no judgment, no barriers. In a narrow sense, that is true. You can probably walk into the office. Walk in with what exactly? A concern, a frustration, a vague sense that something is wrong? On one side of the desk, you. On the other, someone with authority over your schedule, your review, your personnel file, and your professional future. Someone who faces no particular structural consequence if you leave that office unsatisfied and go back to your desk. An open door policy lets you enter the room. It does not give you power inside it. Power in a workplace conversation comes from the credible possibility that something changes if you are not satisfied. One person talking to one manager carries almost none of that. The manager knows, usually correctly, that the conversation ends and you return to work. Access has been sold as leverage. It is not leverage, but it feels like something. You were heard. The outcome is the same. The fifth mechanism requires one specific lie to function, and the lie almost never gets challenged. When organizing becomes visible, the company describes the union as a third party, an outside organization, an intermediary inserting itself between employees and management. We want to work directly with our people. We do not need outside interference in our workplace. A union is workers. It is the people in that building, organized. The labor organization they affiliate with brings legal support, resources, and experience. But the workers are not separate from the union. They are the union. They call the union an outsider because saying your coworkers would make the threat too obvious. Once organizing activity is visible, a specific kind of attention activates. Watch who asked the question in the all-hands meeting that 30 other people were also thinking but did not ask. Watch who other employees go to when they need real information and do not trust the official version. Watch who uses we when describing a workplace problem instead of I. Watch who people cluster around at lunch, confide in, coordinate through without a title, without authority, without an agenda. That person is being watched too. The most dangerous employee in the union-busting campaign is not the loudest one. It is the one other employees trust. The connector is the person who makes collective action possible without calling it that. They are the informal infrastructure of the workplace. Not the most politically radical person in the building, usually. Just the one people believe. The one who knows who is struggling, who knows which managers can be trusted and which cannot, who remembers what was promised and what was delivered. Find that person in any workplace and you have found the center of whatever organizing capacity that workplace has. Identifying them is the first step. The second step follows. Isolation does not need a confrontation. It does not need anyone to say anything incriminating. A schedule change moves the connector to different hours than the employees they talk to most. A reorganization puts them on a different floor. A promotion offer that looks like recognition pulls them out of the environment where they had influence and deposits them somewhere they have to start over socially from scratch. A performance review raises a question, just one, just enough to make standing visibly close to them feel like a calculation other employees are not sure they want to make. A disciplinary action arrives with a precision that would not have been possible 8 months ago. They do not have to defeat the whole group if they can separate the person who helps the group become one. Each decision is defensible in isolation. The schedule change had operational reasons. The reorganization was about workflow efficiency. The performance concern was documented. Viewed individually, nothing looks coordinated. The pattern is only visible from a distance, and seeing it from that distance requires the one thing that has already been made too costly: trusting other employees enough to compare notes. The eighth mechanism is where the language gets most precise. We cannot guarantee what happens to benefits if everything goes to the table. Flexibility that everyone currently enjoys would have to be negotiated from scratch. I have heard these processes can make things more rigid. I just want you to have the full picture. No direct threat in any of those sentences. Nothing that gives a labor attorney a clean target. But you go home that night and you think about the flexible Friday you have worked out with your manager. The arrangement that is not in writing but is held for 2 years. The benefits package you have built your household around. You start doing the company's fear work for it. You start generating the threat yourself, carrying it home, sleeping on it, waking up with it. Modern union busting does not always threaten you. It teaches you to threaten yourself. That is cleaner than a threat. A threat can be reported, documented, challenged. Fear you generated yourself is just your own caution. It lives inside you. Nobody put it there. You worked it out on your own. The ninth mechanism requires a room and a calendar invite. The calendar invite looks normal. All hands update. Optional attendance listed as strongly encouraged. You show up because not showing up feels like a statement. The room fills. Management is at the front, calm, prepared, engaged. HR says they want to make sure everyone has accurate information. A senior leader expresses genuine care for the team. A lawyer's careful language arrives in a voice that sounds like concern. Questions are invited at the end. You are sitting in a row. You can be seen. The manager writing your next review is at the front of the room watching who looks skeptical, who exchanges a glance with a coworker, who asks a pointed question, who does not applaud when others do. The format produces the answer the format was built to produce: silence. Silence gets read as agreement, or at least as the absence of organized resistance. The meeting is called informational because calling it a pressure room would be too honest. Everyone files out. Nothing feels resolved. Something was accomplished, it just cannot be named yet. The 10th mechanism is the most emotionally confusing piece of the playbook, because the people running it are often not performing. The same manager who did not remember your name 4 months ago now asks how you are doing in a way that seems to mean it. Not rushed, not perfunctory, present. A listening session appears on the calendar. Small group, comfortable, informal. HR takes notes. Someone senior says they have been hearing things and want to understand better. Free food materializes in the break room. A survey goes out with real questions and a genuine-looking interface asking you to rate your experience. The same manager who ignored your last 6 emails about scheduling now remembers your name, your workload, your situation. They know things about you that suggest someone has been paying attention. That attention did not exist 2 months ago. When management becomes warm only after workers start comparing notes, the warmth is not culture, it is containment. The confusion is real because the people delivering the warmth may be sincere. A manager can participate in a strategy without knowing they are in one. The calendar invites, the snacks, the listening sessions can all be genuine acts by genuine people inside a coordinated institutional response. That is part of what makes it work. The sincerity is not fake. The timing is the tell. If the responsiveness existed 6 months ago, it means something different. Arriving now, it means something specific. The 11th mechanism makes that visible. Something changes. The supervisor with the worst reputation in the building gets transferred. A scheduling complaint that sat unresolved for 14 months is suddenly addressed. A pay adjustment is announced for a segment of the workforce, not everyone, but enough people that the adjustment circulates as a story. The break room gets a new appliance. A committee forms, employees included, with meeting notes and a documented process for surfacing concerns. These are real. The supervisor is actually gone. The schedule actually changed. But watch what they solved and what they did not. They solved the smallest visible version of the problem, so the bigger, invisible version survives. The pay adjustment does not close the gap. The committee produces recommendations that management is not obligated to implement. The supervisor who was removed is replaced by a different person operating inside the same structure with the same incentives, producing the same outcomes on a slightly delayed schedule. The specific complaint that got fixed was evidence of the problem, not the problem. The evidence has been addressed. The condition that produced it is still running. The 12th mechanism goes after the people who can see that. By now, some employees are still organizing. Their positions have become visible. What follows is not usually a direct management statement. It is something more distributed, harder to source. Those employees start to be described as angry, as perpetually dissatisfied, as people bringing politics into a workplace that was fine before they started agitating. Their work history gets examined with a new kind of attention. Their personality becomes an informal subject. They start to become risky to stand near, not because of anything they did, but because other employees cannot clearly calculate what proximity costs. The company does not need to prove the organizer is dangerous. It only needs coworkers to wonder if standing beside them is risky. The competition structures installed early in the process are most useful here. Workers who already see each other as rivals are already primed to read a colleague's organizing activity as a potential liability to themselves. The reputational work does not need to be dramatic. It only needs to introduce enough doubt that the social cost of visible solidarity rises above what most people are willing to pay. Not because they disagree with the underlying grievances, because they cannot afford to be seen. The 13th mechanism sounds like a compliment. This workplace has a culture. The culture values directness, communication, trust, and collaboration. Those values appear in onboarding materials, in the hallway poster, in the senior leader's remarks at every company event. They are stated with apparent sincerity. Culture is what companies talk about when they do not want workers talking about power. The framing positions collective organizing as a violation of the workplace's stated values. The argument, never made explicitly, lands like this. We already have what you are looking for. We are direct here. We communicate here. We work together. Seeking something through an external structure implies you do not understand or value what has been built. And that argument does not work because it is logically sound. It works because some employees do have genuine affection for their coworkers and their work, and the argument locates the organizing activity as a threat to that genuine thing. The real is used to protect the structure. The 14th mechanism brings the law into the room as a deterrent, not a resource. The rights exist. Workers in the U.S. can legally organize, can legally discuss working conditions, can file complaints, and pursue remedies. All of that is real. A right trapped behind fear, delay, and paperwork is still a right. But to a tired worker trying to survive until next Friday, it may as well be behind glass. The legal process takes time that organizing momentum does not have. It requires navigating systems where the gap between a worker's legal resources and a corporation's legal department is substantial. It involves procedures that most workers have never been taught to use and have no particular reason to trust. The company does not have to explain any of this. It only has to let the distance do the work. Fear, confusion, the story about what happened to someone who tried somewhere else, the vague sense that the process is too complicated for any outcome that would matter in the near term. These close the gap without any explicit management statement. A right you are too afraid to use becomes a decoration. By the time the 15th piece appears, there is almost nothing left to fight with. Not because workers stopped caring, because the ingredients required to move together have been removed one by one. A union drive runs on specific resources, trust among coworkers, because people only take collective risks alongside other people they believe will take them too. A shared vocabulary for the problem, which requires conversations that the third mechanism worked for years to suppress. A shared sense of risk, which requires that the reputational work of the 12th mechanism did not make solidarity feel like professional exposure. Shared anger that has not been diffused by small fixes. a connector who can still reach the people who need to move together at the same time. The company does not have to beat the union if it can stop workers from becoming a we. Nobody had to lose a vote. Nobody had to sign a surrender. Nobody even had to acknowledge a campaign was running. The silence did the work. The full shape of it, laid flat, looks like this. The workplace teaches individual survival. Then it builds the structures that make coworkers into competitors. Then it makes shared conversation feel like a professional liability. Then it offers management access and calls that power. Then it describes worker organization as an outside intrusion rather than workers organizing themselves. Then it identifies the person other employees trust. Then it moves them, promotes them, isolates them through decisions that each look routine. Then it installs soft fear without a direct threat. Then it holds the meeting that looks like information and functions like pressure. Then it produces small responsive changes that absorb the pressure without touching what created it. Then it makes the employees who can still see through the changes look risky to the ones who cannot. Then it wraps the entire structure in culture language. Then it lets the legal system's distance do the remaining work. Then everyone goes back to work feeling like nothing happened. Think about the silence after someone mentioned pay and the temperature in the room changed. The all-hands meeting that appeared on a Thursday with no context. The coworker who used to be the person everyone went to, who stopped being that person right around the time they got promoted. The manager who suddenly became interested in how you were doing, who brought food, who wanted to know if you felt heard. The survey that appeared with real questions and a real interface and no visible outcome. None of it was random. None of it arrived on its own schedule. The group almost became conscious, and the company stopped it. Most workplaces do not crush unions at the ballot box. They kill the possibility much earlier, in the silence between coworkers who all know something is wrong, but no longer trust each other enough to say it.